happens when the United States stages one of the largest cartel raids in its history, yet discovers that the chemical floodgates remain wide open. In Los Angeles, that question was brutally answered in the summer of 2025. Within a single week, more than 600 cartel suspects were taken into custody, millions of dollars in illicit cash were seized, and some of the most sophisticated labs ever uncovered on American soil were dismantled. Federal agencies hailed the mission as a landmark strike, but behind the triumph, an even darker reality emerged, one that underscored how thin the line is between tactical victories and strategic stalemate. Could the US truly win a war against cartels whose supply chains stretch across continents? The operation was unprecedented in scale. Over 5 days, agents from ICE, the DEA, the FBI, Homeland Security, and local law enforcement stormed cartel safehouses, warehouses, and hidden laboratories across Los Angeles. By the end, officials confirmed that 617 suspects were booked. The seizures were staggering: $11 million in cash, more than 400 firearms, 229 kilograms of methamphetamine, nearly 7,500 kilograms of cocaine, and more than 714,000 counterfeit fentanyl pills. Each number carried its own grim weight, a vivid reminder that this was not a small-scale disruption, but a direct blow against the command nodes of cartels operating deep within the United States. Yet as agents dismantled labs and cataloged evidence, an alarming fact surfaced: a single shipment of 300,000 kilograms of chemical precursors had slipped unnoticed through Los Angeles International Airport. That one load alone was enough to fuel cartel super labs, for months generating millions of doses of methamphetamine. Federal audits had long warned about gaps in cargo screening, and here was the proof. The success of the raids highlighted enforcement's growing precision, but the failure to stem precursor flows revealed the vulnerability of America's broader defenses. This contradiction: massive arrests alongside unstoppable inflows, mirrors other security dilemmas the US faces globally. Consider the war in Ukraine, where Ukrainian forces can destroy entire Russian convoys with drones, yet Moscow continues to receive supplies through back channels, including Iranian drones and North Korean munitions. Tactical victories mount, but the industrial pipelines feeding the conflict remain open. The Los Angeles raids fit the same pattern. Enforcement agencies can cripple labs, but without closing international chemical routes, the cartels will rebuild faster than they are dismantled. Western experts quickly weighed in. According to RAND analysts cited in September 2025, the raids demonstrate that American interagency coordination is improving, but the sheer scale of synthetic drug production demands a strategy more akin to countering weapons proliferation. One former NATO commander compared fentanyl precursors to weapons of mass destruction in slow motion, noting that their lethality surpasses many battlefield toxins. In his words, a single unchecked shipment can kill more Americans than a conventional missile strike. For ordinary families in Los Angeles, the raids were both reassuring and terrifying. Hazmat teams in West Covina were forced to evacuate 120 households after discovering a fentanyl lab hidden inside a $1 million suburban home. Parents lost workdays, children missed school, and neighbors realized that deadly operations had been running right next door. This was no distant battlefield. The front line of the drug war had crept into residential streets. The White House under President Trump seized on the results, declaring that the August crackdown was proof of America's will to strike cartels at their roots. Officials promised new investments in cargo screening technology at LAX and called for expanded cooperation with India and China to track chemical exports. Yet critics warned that without airtight oversight, precursor pipelines would remain as resilient as arms smuggling networks that sustained conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. So what is the larger lesson of the Los Angeles raids? Tactical enforcement can deliver spectacular wins, but unless the chemical gateways are secured, the war will remain endless. As viewers consider this, one pressing question lingers: if America can mobilize intelligence, drones, and cyber capabilities for wars abroad, why has it struggled to close the chemical corridors fueling a war at home? How does a single airport become the beating heart of a global narcotics empire? The answer lies in Los Angeles International Airport, better known as LAX. Every day, thousands of shipments arrive from across the Pacific, and hidden among them are the industrial chemicals that cartels crave. These are not harvested crops or jungle labs anymore. Synthetic drugs thrive on chemical precursors, the basic building blocks that flow through legitimate supply chains. And LAX, the largest hub on America's West Coast, has become the chemical gateway for cartels linking Asia, Latin America, and the United States. Federal investigations revealed how these networks operate. Cartels disguise precursors as everyday products, cleaning solvents, food additives, even cosmetics. Once the shipments arrive, they are quietly diverted into bonded warehouses, bypassing normal inspections. A Department of Justice report in mid-2025 confirmed that one 300,000 kilogram shipment of methamphetamine precursors slipped through undetected. Analysts said that shipment alone had the potential to sustain super labs for months, producing enough meth to flood not only Los Angeles, but also overseas markets from New Zealand to Australia. This is not just a criminal operation, it is a global supply chain, rivaling legal industries in scale and sophistication. Western experts now compare it to the weapons trade. Much like how Iran moves drones through concealed shipping networks to support Russia's war in Ukraine, cartels rely on similar logistical mastery to sustain their operations. The comparison is sobering. While NATO tracks missile shipments to protect cities like Kyiv, American authorities face a parallel challenge in keeping lethal precursors out of US neighborhoods. Audits as far back as 2020 flagged LAX's vulnerabilities, understaffed inspection teams, overwhelmed scanning systems, and reliance on paperwork from brokers who sometimes colluded with criminal networks. In two major cases, customs brokers were stripped of their licenses after investigators discovered falsified manifests tied to Sinaloa cartel shell companies. Yet the damage was already done. By the time authorities intervened, thousands of barrels of precursor chemicals had already been processed, giving cartels months of uninterrupted production capacity. The financial incentives explain why the stakes are so high. A pound of meth might sell for around $800 in Los Angeles. Ship that same pound to New Zealand, and it can fetch over $200,000. Federal indictments described how couriers recruited through encrypted apps carried vacuum-sealed packages from East LA to Auckland, receiving six-figure cryptocurrency payouts. For desperate couriers, the promise of fast wealth outweighed the risks. Each successful trip emboldened cartels to expand further, weaving a transnational web that enforcement alone could not easily untangle. Here, the geopolitical parallels deepen, as Western leaders warn about China's dominance in critical supply chains. From rare earth minerals to semiconductors, US officials are facing a similar vulnerability with narcotics. Much of the precursor stream originates in Chinese and Indian chemical industries. Without binding international agreements, shipments keep moving, and cartels exploit every gap. According to a BBC analysis in August 2025, Chinese firms sometimes unwittingly, sometimes deliberately remain the top suppliers of fentanyl precursors globally. President Trump's administration has called for sanctions and tighter trade controls, echoing measures already used in strategic disputes with Beijing. Yet experts warn that sanctions alone will not solve the problem. A RAND policy paper argued that just as arms proliferation requires multinational coordination, halting precursor flows will demand a NATO-style coalition targeting chemical diversion. Without it, the war risks becoming endless. And so the question grows sharper: if synthetic narcotics are killing more Americans each year than any foreign adversary ever has in combat, why hasn't the US treated the precursor trade with the same urgency it gives to nuclear or missile proliferation? Could a true multinational crackdown spanning customs intelligence and diplomacy finally sever the arteries that feed the cartels? What fuels a cartel empire once the chemicals arrive? The answer is not just in drugs, but in money, vast hidden rivers of cash that sustain the machinery of violence. The Los Angeles raids exposed more than narcotics and weapons. They also revealed the staggering financial architecture behind cartel operations. Investigators uncovered elaborate money laundering networks designed to funnel billions of dollars through shell companies, false invoices, and encrypted cryptocurrency wallets. In one Connecticut operation alone, agents seized over $1.2 million hidden in a false wall vacuum, sealed in plastic bags, a small glimpse of the larger empire cartels build to shield their wealth. The business model is ruthless in its efficiency. Internal communications uncovered during the raids showed cartel members discussing marketing strategies and price models as if they were executives at a multinational corporation. One DEA official summarized it bluntly: "To them, overdose deaths are not tragedies, they are overhead." This cynical calculus explains how cartels thrive despite relentless enforcement. Losses in drugs, cash, or even mid-level operatives are written off as the cost of doing business, while profits flow steadily back into the system through sophisticated laundering operations. The global reach of these networks is staggering. Evidence tied Los Angeles-based cells to transactions in more than 30 countries from Europe to the Pacific. Synthetic drugs like fentanyl and methamphetamine being cheaper and easier to transport than cocaine or heroin make international expansion even more lucrative. A single pound of meth routed to Oceania generates profits that rival arms deals. Federal indictments noted couriers carrying shipments through international hubs, often recruited through anonymous encrypted apps and paid in cryptocurrency, which allows cartels to bypass traditional banking scrutiny. Here, the parallels to global conflict become inescapable. Just as Russia finances its war in Ukraine through oil sales and shadow trading, cartels rely on money laundering to fund their relentless expansion. Western experts argue that the fight against narcotics has reached the level of counter-proliferation campaigns. A London School of Economics study in 2025 emphasized that the financial backbone of cartels should be treated as seriously as terrorist financing, given its destabilizing impact on entire regions. The raids also underscored the adaptability of cartels. When US authorities froze certain accounts, cartels pivoted to new platforms using decentralized finance networks and even experimenting with emerging digital tokens outside mainstream cryptocurrency markets. Intelligence officials warned that these adaptations mirrored how sanctioned states like Iran and North Korea evade global restrictions, proof that cartels are not merely criminal gangs, but strategic actors in a financial shadow war. For American families, the impact of these financial flows is less visible, but no less devastating. Every dollar laundered and reinvested strengthens the infrastructure that pushes fentanyl pills onto streets and weapons into the hands of enforcers. Neighborhood safety healthcare systems and even school districts bear the secondary cost as overdoses surge and violence spreads. According to CDC data from mid-2025, synthetic overdoses claimed more than 100,000 American lives in a single year, a number greater than all U.S. combat deaths in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan combined. President Trump's administration has responded by tasking Treasury and Homeland Security with expanding financial intelligence operations modeled on counterterrorism efforts. Officials hope that by following the money as aggressively as the drugs, they can choke cartel empires at their source. Still, skeptics warn that as long as demand persists and precursor flows remain open, financial networks will regenerate like Hydra heads. The lesson from Los Angeles is sobering. The fight is not only in the streets or the labs, it is in the ledgers, the shell companies, and the crypto wallets. Unless the financial arteries of cartels are severed, tactical raids will remain temporary victories in a much larger war. And the question remains, if America can sanction Russian oligarchs and dismantle terror financing, why not apply the same relentless pressure to cartel wealth? What happens when the battlefield is not a distant desert or jungle, but the quiet street outside a family's home? The Los Angeles raids revealed that cartel violence and synthetic drug production are no longer confined to remote warehouses or border hideouts. They are embedded in American neighborhoods. Agents stormed million-dollar suburban homes in West Covina, only to find full-scale fentanyl labs concealed behind manicured lawns and picket fences. Hazmat teams were forced to evacuate 120 families, quarantining streets for days to neutralize toxic residues. Parents missed work, children were barred from school, and entire blocks lived in fear long after the barricades were lifted. This chilling reality demonstrates that synthetic narcotics are not a distant crisis, they are woven into the fabric of daily life. Cartels embed labs within communities because it allows them to blend in shield production from detection and exploit the very infrastructure that sustains ordinary Americans. A home equipped with utilities and a garage can easily become a chemical factory, its outward normalcy hiding a lethal enterprise. For neighbors, the discovery feels like betrayal. The family next door might actually be the front line of a cartel operation. The raids also uncovered brutal violence playing out in daylight. In neighborhoods like Southgate and Pico Rivera, gunfights erupted as rival factions within the Sinaloa cartel fought for dominance. Civilians were forced to dive for cover in broad daylight, witnessing firsthand that cartel power struggles are not abstract battles in Mexico. They spill directly onto U.S. streets. Intelligence linked these shootouts to succession disputes after Ismael El Mayo Zambada reportedly began stepping back from cartel leadership. His absence created a vacuum that El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos, sought to fill, igniting violent contests with emerging figures like El Fantasma and LT. These developments mirror the destabilizing effect of leadership changes in global conflicts. Analysts compare them to the infighting among Russian elites following battlefield setbacks in Ukraine, or the escalating power plays among Iranian proxies in the Middle East. Each arrest or assassination within cartel ranks, like each sanctioned oligarch or eliminated commander abroad, generates not stability, but chaos. As the Los Angeles raids proved, every time one node is removed, another rises, often with even bloodier ambition. For ordinary citizens, this raises troubling questions. How much longer can neighborhoods absorb this kind of shock? Reports from Reuters in August 2025 emphasize that Americans increasingly feel their communities resemble war zones where explosions and evacuations are no longer foreign news but local reality. Public trust erodes when families see bullet-ridden houses or children grow up practicing lockdown drills because cartel violence erupted outside their school. Experts argue that the infiltration of communities represents a strategic shift by cartels. By embedding within neighborhoods, they turn every raid into a public spectacle, forcing U.S. agencies into a reactive posture. RAND analysts noted that this tactic mirrors insurgent strategies in urban warfare, forcing militaries to operate under the gaze of civilians, where every strike risks collateral damage. The difference is that here the war is not in Baghdad or Aleppo, it is in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston. President Trump, addressing the nation after the raids, declared that the fight against cartels was no longer just law enforcement but a national security battle on American soil. His administration pledged new resources for community protection, emphasizing coordination between federal agencies and local police to prevent neighborhoods from becoming staging grounds for cartel empires. Still, critics ask whether this response can truly keep pace with an enemy that thrives in the shadows of suburbia. The reality remains, synthetic drug production has penetrated the very spaces Americans once believed safe. The front line is not just the border, not just the ports, but the neighborhoods themselves. And one question lingers: if America cannot keep its own streets free from cartel warfare, how can it credibly lead NATO and global coalitions in conflicts abroad? What happens when the decapitation of a cartel does not end violence, but multiplies it? The Los Angeles raids highlighted a brutal truth: leadership struggles inside the Sinaloa cartel have turned American cities into collateral battlefields. For decades, Ismael El Mayo Zambada was seen as the steady hand guiding cartel operations, but reports in mid-2025 suggested he was stepping back, whether due to age, health, or internal pressure. His retreat created a vacuum instantly contested by Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, alongside upstart figures like El Fantasma and LT. The consequences were immediate and bloody. In Los Angeles, neighborhoods such as Southgate and Pico Rivera saw shootouts break out in broad daylight, with civilians diving for cover as automatic weapons fire echoed down residential streets. Intelligence officials confirmed these were not random clashes, but deliberate territorial offensives designed to secure routes, labs, and profits. Each faction viewed the fall of rivals not as deterrence, but as opportunity. This cycle reflects a pattern familiar in global conflict zones. When a strongman leader falls, whether Saddam Hussein in Iraq, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, or Wagner's Yevgeny Prigozhin in Russia, the result is rarely stability. Instead, splinter groups and ambitious lieutenants surge forward, often bringing more chaos than the figure they replaced. Cartel dynamics mirror this reality. Every major arrest in Mexico or the United States sparks not peace, but a scramble for dominance. For U.S. national security planners, the lesson is sobering. Tactical victories like the August raids can weaken command structures, but unless leadership vacuums are stabilized, violence will metastasize. RAND analysts in 2025 compared this phenomenon to insurgencies remove one commander and rival networks emerge faster than they can be dismantled. This mirrors NATO's struggles in Afghanistan, where decapitating Taliban leaders often triggered waves of retaliatory attacks. The human toll is immense. Families caught between factions live with nightly gunfire, schools adopt lockdown protocols, and communities lose faith in law enforcement's ability to protect them. In Los Angeles, residents described neighborhoods feeling like foreign war zones, a phrase echoed in coverage by BBC World News. The psychological damage, fear, displacement, and mistrust cannot be measured solely in arrests or seizures. President Trump's administration has pushed for designating certain cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, a move intended to justify broader counterterrorism-style operations. Proponents argue this would allow the U.S. to target leadership networks globally, much as it did with ISIS. Critics, however, warn of unintended consequences. Such a designation could complicate diplomacy, with Mexico spark sovereignty disputes, and even inflame violence further. The broader geopolitical implications are striking. As cartels adapt to enforcement, they increasingly resemble hybrid actors, part criminal, part insurgent, part multinational corporation. Western experts stress that their reach rivals that of non-state groups NATO already treats as security threats. The comparison is stark. While NATO debates defense against hypersonic missiles or Iranian proxies, American communities face their own insurgency in the form of cartel empires. And here lies the strategic question for viewers: should cartels be fought with the tools of law enforcement or with the doctrine of counterinsurgency and counterterrorism? If the raids prove that the US can dismantle networks, they also prove that victory on paper often means new battles in reality. Without a broader strategy for stabilizing leadership vacuums, each enforcement success risks becoming the trigger for the next explosion of violence. The Los Angeles raids remind us of a simple but devastating truth. Cartels are not weakened by leadership struggles, they are reshaped by them. The war becomes not a contest of law against crime, but a constant reshuffling of power with civilians left in the crossfire. So the pressing question remains: if every victory only seeds the next conflict, how can the United States ever claim lasting success in this war? What if America keeps winning battles but continues losing the war? The Los Angeles raids showed that U.S. enforcement agencies can coordinate at historic levels, stripping cartels of weapons, drugs, and cash in a single week. ICE, DEA, FBI, and Homeland Security worked in lockstep targeting labs, couriers, and financiers simultaneously across 23 states. Wiretaps and surveillance tied seizures directly back to Sinaloa command nodes, proving that tactical precision is no longer a weakness. For 1 week in August 2025, the cartels were on the defensive, their networks disrupted, their profits gutted. But the larger reality is sobering. Even as enforcement celebrated its triumph, the chemical pipeline kept flowing. Los Angeles International Airport remained overwhelmed by sheer volume, with shipments from China and India slipping through under falsified paperwork. Each time a shipment is stopped, officials quietly admit that others have already made it through. The battle resembles plugging holes in a dam, while floodwaters keep rising. Unless that chemical artery is sealed, raids will remain symbolic rather than decisive. This dilemma mirrors global conflicts. In Ukraine, Western-supplied weapons have delivered tactical victories, but Russia sustains its war effort through shadow trade in oil and foreign munitions. In the Middle East, Israeli strikes may eliminate commanders, yet Iranian proxy networks quickly regenerate. And in the Pacific, U.S. naval patrols deter Chinese aggression, but Beijing continues to expand influence through trade and cyber networks. In every case, tactical victories pile up, but the underlying supply chain, the true engine of power, remains intact. Experts warn that America risks fighting a perpetual war at home. RAND analysts in 2025 described it as whack-a-mole enforcement, effective at disruption, but incapable of achieving finality. One Western general compared it to NATO's challenge in Afghanistan. You can win every raid, every firefight, but if the supply lines remain open, you are locked in forever. For cartels, the supply line is chemical precursors. For the US, failure to shut it down means fighting on repeat year after year. President Trump's administration has vowed to escalate. Proposals include new trade restrictions on Chinese chemical exporters, expanded surveillance at cargo hubs, and even international task forces to track precursor flows, much like nuclear material. Advocates argue that fentanyl and meth precursors should be treated as weapons of mass lethality, given that more than 100,000 Americans died from overdoses in the past year, an annual toll greater than any modern war. Yet critics caution that without bipartisan consensus and genuine multinational cooperation, these efforts risk becoming another cycle of promises overshadowed by cartel adaptability. The August raids also demonstrated the paradox of enforcement. Each tactical success proves American capability, but also exposes the depth of the challenge. For families in Los Angeles, it means relief one day and renewed fear the next as rumors of rebuilt labs circulate. For policymakers in Washington, it means standing at a crossroads between celebrating victories and acknowledging that the war remains unwon. And so the final question stands starkly before viewers: can the United States transform tactical victories into strategic triumphs, or will the war against cartels mirror the endless conflicts abroad fought valiantly yet never truly concluded? The Los Angeles cartel raids of August 2025 marked one of the largest ICE-led crackdowns in U.S. history. Over 600 suspects were arrested, $11 million seized, and thousands of kilograms of synthetic narcotics pulled from circulation. Yet the triumph exposed a deeper problem. Cartels continue to exploit chemical gateways, particularly through LAX, where precursor shipments from China and India slip through under falsified paperwork. These precursors sustain super labs capable of producing millions of lethal doses, ensuring that even as one lab is dismantled, another rises. The raids also revealed the cartel's sprawling financial empire, global reach, and ruthless adaptability. Money laundering networks spanned continents, while leadership struggles within the Sinaloa cartel fueled new violence across Los Angeles neighborhoods. Civilians lived in fear as gunfights erupted in broad daylight, proving that the front line of America's drug war is no longer abroad but at home. Experts argue that without treating precursors like weapons of mass lethality and forging multinational cooperation, the US risks perpetual conflict, winning raids but losing the war. The central question remains, can tactical victories be transformed into strategic triumphs, or will the nation remain locked in an endless struggle against cartels?